Francesco Branca to join us. Francesco, the floor is yours for your presentation.
Well, bom dia a todos e a todos, and thank you, Diogo, for introducing me, and thanks, Mark, for organizing this forum. I also have a presentation to share, and really the topic I'm going to cover today is the connection between food and non-communicable diseases. And then, do we have any policy option for the response? So I'll really start by indicating that unhealthy diet and malnutrition are among the top risk factors for the global disease burden. You see, this is the number of deaths calculated by the Institute of Health Metrics and Evaluation. So these are the top risk factors. High blood pressure is really on the top, tobacco, but then the dietary risk, you see, comes sometimes second, sometimes third, but definitely responsible for a large number of deaths. And the latest estimate is about 8 million deaths. But food and nutrition are also having an impact on non-communicable diseases through obesity, a high body mass index, and through malnutrition. And this is basically additional 8 million deaths. And if you look at those components, you'll see that the dietary risk and the high BMI are really having an enormous impact on cardiovascular disease, on diabetes, and on cancer. I mean, these basically account for most of the deaths that are associated to the basically these risks. Now, if you go a bit more in detail in unhealthy diet, you'll see that, and this is the ranking we have. You see that diets high in sodium are probably the ones, the risk factor that is responsible for most deaths. So you have excess consumption of sodium, you have excess consumption of sugar-sweetened beverages, you have excess consumption of processed meat and red meat, but you have a lot of insufficient consumption. So you have diet low in whole grains or fruits or vegetables or nuts that are also responsible for a large number of that. And on the left side of the panel, you can also see the difference between high and middle income countries and low and middle income countries, but you see that no countries is basically exempt from this dietary risk. So it is definitely a global issue. I would like also to add another element, which has been contributed a lot by research in Brazil, the work of Carlos Monteiro, and that is the issue of processing. So on the one hand, we have the components of the diet, so we have the nutrients, but on the other hand is also how the foods and nutrients are handled. So Carlos Monteiro has somehow classified foods into 4 groups. It said first group is foods which are minimally processed or unprocessed, like the milk, fish, fruit, vegetables. The second group is the processed culinary ingredients. So these are substances that are derived from this first group and then are used as ingredients for preparations. And you have, for example, oil or butter or honey, and there's some element of processing, but these foods are used as a component of preparation. Then the third one is processed foods. And this is really the outcome of processing, for example, cheese or meat or canned fish or wine and bread, of course. So these are mainly made of ingredients from group 1 and group 2. But then there's a fourth group, which is called ultra-processed food. That includes sugar-sweetened beverages, certain ice creams, drinks, certain manufactured pizzas that have the characteristics of being produced from a combination of basic elements that are derived from group 1, but have very little to do with group 1. And as you know, there are some staples, for example, maize, that can be used to extract a number of sub-products which are then recomposed to make ultra-processed food. So basically, this classification is looking at different degrees of processing. The different countries in the world have different degrees of consumption of ultra-processed food. There's a classification that has been developed, the NOVA classification, that allows this estimate. And you see that countries like the United States consume most of their food from this kind of products, whereas in other countries, such as, for example, some of the European countries, this is much less consumed. Latin America is a little bit in between. This is also a transition which is changing very quickly. Now, there's been an association with the consumption of ultra-processed foods and different NCDs. In this case, you see there's an association with obesity. It doesn't seem necessarily going in the right direction. But if you, for example, look at within a country, so this is the case of Canada, you see that by dividing the population in terms of their quintiles of consumption of ultra-processed food, you see really a graded increase, for example, in this case of obesity. So there is a predicted adjusted odd ratio of obesity across quintiles of ultra-processed food consumption that really increases. So you have about a 30% increase rate of obesity in groups of population that consume a higher proportion of ultra-processed food. So ultra-processed foods are now being looked at with an increased interest, really as an additional component on its own of risk for non-communicable diseases. WHO has been developing and updating its definition of a healthy diet, which is globally relevant. We need to come with common elements that might be helpful in all circumstances. And the objective of a healthy diet is really to have optimal human growth and development, but also prevent malnutrition in all its forms. And we need to remember there are multiple forms of malnutrition. Even the Sustainable Development Goals speak about all forms of malnutrition. We include, let's say, three groups of deficiency of malnutrition, three elements of malnutrition. The first one is undernutrition, so wasting, stunting. Second one is inadequate level of vitamins and minerals, so micronutrient deficiencies. And the third one is obesity, which with its comorbidities and its outcome on diet-related non-communicable diseases. So we need to have a diet which is able to address all these conditions in all circumstances. And our recommendation should really aim at addressing all these forms of malnutrition concurrently. So we shouldn't have, a diet for undernutrition and then a diet for NCD risk, and they have to be simultaneous. And it's possible, and by looking at different approaches, by considering different approaches to come up with this definition, we end up, systematically with the same set of elements. The first one is around plant foods and having a large component of the diet coming from fruit, vegetables, legumes, nuts, whole grains. Then having at least 400 grams of fruit and vegetables per day. This is excluding the roots and tubers. Having less than 10% of total energy intake from free sugars, less than 30% of total energy from fats, and having plant fats, unsaturated fats, more than saturated fats and trans fat of all kinds, having less than 5 grams of salt per day, and drinking safe tap water. Now, this diet happens to be also very useful to reduce, to minimize the environmental impact. And you know, this is a graph from a recent publication that WHO developed with FAO. So you see in the first part, you see the components of the diet that maximize health. The second part is, you know, how this diet is really able to reduce greenhouse gas emissions, preserve biodiversity, minimize the use of antibiotics and hormones in food production, minimize the use of pesticides, but also packaging materials. But it's also a diet which is appealing from the point of view of the culture, and also more equitable. Now, the problem is that this diet is not necessarily affordable to all. So we calculated about 3 billion people in the world cannot afford these diets, which are the kind of ideal diets we would like to receive. So how do we handle that? Last year, there was a UN summit, the UN Food System Summit, that brought the food system transformation high up in the political agenda. And WHO developed a series of recommendations of effective policies. We're actually now also calculating the cost effectiveness. And so we're saying that that these policies are not only cost effective, but also affordable to low-income countries. So they are what we call the best buys. And as you know, there is a list of best buys for non-communicable disease prevention. So we are updating that list, and these policies should most likely feature in that list. So these policies are particularly looking at the food environment. The first one is for reformulation of manufactured product with less salt, less sugars, and less unhealthy fats. And having more nutrition component, particularly the whole meal grains and the nuts. The second one is about price policies, which would increase the cost of unhealthy products and subsidize healthy options. The third one is public food procurements. So basically allowing people that are having food in public institutions such as schools, hospitals, government canteens to have access to healthy diet. And this is also important because it would drive the whole food system to produce foods which are the ones that we would like to see in a healthy diet. Just only the city of New York buys several million meals every day. So it's just to give you an idea of the value and the impact of these policies. Fourth one is about clear messages for consumers to make their choices through front of the pack labeling. We know that in Latin America, there's been a very successful use of warning labels, as in Chile and Mexico, communicating to people that certain products should be consumed in much lower amounts. Fifth important policy is the policy of fortification, addition back of vitamins and minerals, particularly through the staples that, such as cereals, that have been processed in a way that this nutrients have been removed. And finally, but probably one of the most important, is regulations that curb marketing of products, particularly to children, that are high in fat, sugar, and salt. So these policy options, we believe, are going to be important game changers for the transformation of the food system. The status of the art is that we only have these policies applied in some countries. Sugar sweetened beverage taxes, we have counted 79. Not all of them are, however, done in the way that is really capable of making substantial changes in consumption level. We believe that at least 20% of the value of the product should be taxed. Food product reformulation, you see 60 countries, basically a third of the all countries in the world. Front of the pack labeling initiative, only about 20% of the countries. Public food procurement is a more interesting one. More countries are doing that. Fortification, I think we're doing well with the salt iodization, a bit less well with wheat flour fortification, and the marketing restrictions are really only applied in about a fourth of the countries in the world. So there's quite a lot to do. So I hope that we can all have collaborations and strong advocacy for the implementation of this policy. So thank you very much for your attention.